This is going to be a more kind of a topical presentation. I will be going through some quick facts, and then I will talk about the conflict and the peace process, as well as how we have developed in the last years and how we have progressed, from this, let's call it like dark ages. So let's get started. I don't know how. It's kind of slow, my computer today for some reason. All right. So, some quick facts to start. Colombia is roughly the size of Texas and California combined. Oh, by the way, you can make any questions at any time if you want to. This is the last time I didn't say that, so. So Colombia is roughly the size of Texas and California combined. In Colombia, you can have tropics in the coast, you can have rainforest, a varied climate and everything. In Bogota, which is the capital, which is where I'm from, it's a little bit colder. It's between the 40s and 70s, kind of like. So it's cold for us, maybe not for you guys, but it's cold for us. Anyway. Well, the capital is Bogota. That's where I come from. The population is roughly 46 million people, and that includes 85 ethnic groups. I will talk about them a little bit later. The official language is Spanish, although there are many dialects that are spoken in the Amazon areas where they're like native people there. The currency is the Colombian peso. The $1 is roughly 2,400 pesos. That will get you, I would say, to make like a thing, it will get you a piece of pastry or something and a Coke if you buy something with that. So moving forward with the topic, I will start talking about the conflict and the peace process. This conflict in particular, it's kind of complex because it involves a lot of people, and it is, well, to me it was kind of confusing when I was researching about it. So trivia question. How long has Colombia been in conflict? Does anybody would like to take a guess? Not everybody at the same time. Yes? Anyone else?
32?
All right. So, yep, 67. This conflict has kind of changed throughout time, so it's not the same conflict 67 years ago as it is now, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. And it has kind of like involved more parties or less parties or whatever. So a little bit of background on the conflict. The conflict actually started with political violence between the liberals and the conservatives, kind of like in the 1940s, roughly. So Colombia used to be only a bit partition. It used to be a democracy. It is a democracy. But the only two parties that were allowed were those of the liberals and the conservatives. No other parties were allowed, no other ideals were allowed. And, well, it was kind of easy to get by with these because before, the Colombian population used to be illiterate. Like, not a lot of people actually knew how to read or write or were very, like, culture or involved in the society. So that kind of led to a set of circumstances that eventually became very violent. So usually, between those 10 years, the violence kind of was more in the rural areas, in the countryside, and it wasn't, like, people in the cities didn't actually feel it until this event called Bogotazo, which what that was is that there was this guy called Jorge Eliezer Gaitan, and he was a liberal. He was actually a socialist, but then he was kind of like, okay, I'm gonna make myself liberal. And so he moved a lot of people with his not communist, but socialist ideas of like social, discontent and all those things. And he was assassinated on April 9th of 1948. And that caused violent protests in the capital. A lot of people got killed. The city got almost destroyed, and that's what we say. That's what we call Bogotazo, actually. But that event, that particular event, set a lot of like a chain effect thing, where not only in Bogota violence break out, but also in other cities in Colombia, like Medellin or Barranquilla or others. And also even more violence in the countryside. So it was that horrible that, for example, if you were a liberal, liberals used to be, still are represented with the red color in Colombia, and the conservatives with the blue color. So for example, if you are a liberal, you always had to wear something red to be recognized, and you could never step on a conservative town, because otherwise you would probably get killed or something, or horrible, or like stones thrown at you or something. So it was very, very dark times. The population there used to be about 11 million people, and out of those 11 million people, 200,000 died in those 10 years. And the death count increased the following years when the guerrillas came, which I will be talking now. So the guerrilla conflict kind of started as a response to all of this political violence. A lot of communists, a lot of workers and farmers decided to unite against, liberals and conservatives, because they were being extortioned basically by these two parties. So they decided to kind of follow their own socialist communist ideas and decided to unite. And not only that, for instance, there were other influences. During that time, that was around the 60s, the early 60s, so 1964 the 60s. So during that time, there was something happened, another thing happened in Latin America, the Cuban Revolution. That also inspired a bunch of people in Colombia to create rebel forces and to, become a guerrilla group. So a bunch of organizations emerged from this. Some of the most relevant examples is the FARC, which is the group that we're now negotiating with in the government. The ELN, which is the National Liberation Army in English. And the M19, which that was a little bit more current, I would say, started in the 70s. And it was a response, it was a communist response to the fail of some elections that happened in those years. But alongside there were many other groups, paramilitary groups, self-defense groups from the farmers, but they were all kind of mixed together. So I would say probably call it civil war, but it wasn't exactly. It's kind of an interesting case. And on the other hand, in the 80s, 70s, 80s, something else came up, which was narco-traffic and the drug trade. So it's kind of like adding a lot of stuff to a poison thing. When you have rebel groups and drug trade and drug lords, that kind of unchains a whole different violent acts all over the country. So the drug trade started actually in Peru and Bolivia because they had a lot of influence with the coca plant, but it kind of moved to Colombia. And so obviously the drug lords started to take advantage of that, started to take advantage of the fact that Colombia had very fertile soils that allowed the cultivation of these illicit crops. And so the guerrilla actually felt kind of threatened about these drug lords. And so they realized actually soon enough that the drug trade was a way to finance their operations. So not only the drug lords had drugs, but also the guerrillas. So, and in between those, they were kind of also at war. So there were a lot of kidnappings, extortion, ransom demands, and all over the place. And so, it was they realized they had profit with that. So it was kind of cool. So aside from that, not only those were two parties involved, but also the state kind of got involved in that. But they didn't really have an idea how to do it because the narco-traffic was so strong in Colombia during those ages. They basically controlled the state as well, We have this guy called Pablo Escobar. I don't know if you've heard of him. Well, the guy was so powerful during those years, that he almost proposed to the current president to buy the foreign debt. That's how powerful he was. Like, for a guy to tell the president to buy foreign debt, that's a pretty big deal. So he managed to get into Congress and to get into the Senate, and then he was put into jail, but it was a jail that he managed, so he escaped. In the end, well, it was kind of, yeah, it was a lot of actors in that conflict that kind of made a horrible mix. Obviously, during those times, there were attempts of negotiation between the parties, but were failed. They failed. None of them were successful. The first one was in 1982. President Belisario Betancourt, he was the first one to try to negotiate with the guerrillas, but he lacked the political support. So the negotiations didn't go anywhere. Later on, something that happened was that the M19, one of the groups that I mentioned before, they demobilized. After a series of tragic events, and extortions and kidnappings, that they finally realized that they were not going to get them anywhere, so they demobilized and they became a political opposition party. They actually still have some people in office right now, and in the 90s they were mostly elected for the Congress and the Senate. So it kind of led to something good, but still the conflict, existed. The drug trade still existed. And then in 1998, President Andrés Pastrana came. He wasn't the second to attempt to negotiate. But this one was kind of the most controversial in the country, because he made a zone, a no-fighting zone, call it like a zero-ground zone, in the middle of the country. And so it didn't have any the FARC didn't have any conditions. They could still fight. They could still, commit crimes and everything. And as they tried to negotiate, the FARC actually grew stronger. So they continued to kidnap people. They continued to make massacres in towns. The drug trade still continues. So they failed. And they were very controversial. The people realized, well, this can't be good. This can't be going on. So that was the last kind of attempt. The next thing that happened the next years, until the current negotiations, was mostly a battle between the state and FARC, basically. The government did more military offensives in those years before these new negotiations. Actually, with the help of the United States. They had a thing called Black Colombia, which not only was to fight the drug trade, but also the guerrillas. The U.S. provided military assistance, and they provided a bunch of stuff, technology and weapons and aid and other things. However, now there is an ongoing peace process going on. It started in 2012 under our current president. He was re-elected, Juan Manuel Santos. The negotiations are taking place in La Habana, Cuba. And they are kind of more organized than the ones before. They actually have like a route towards peace, if you call it that way. They set an agenda, which is composed of these main pillars, starting with rural development. So it's kind of talking about land and redistribution of the land and all of this stuff. Political opposition and participation, the end of the conflict as such, narco-traffic, and the reparation of the victims, which is a critical point. So right now, there are a lot of parties involved. It's not just the government and the military and FARC, but there have been numerous people that have gone to La Habana to negotiate, including, representatives of the victims of kidnappings and all of those things. Well, right now, there's still ongoing negotiations. They haven't stopped. There have been through some crisis because FARC is still attacking people, and they refuse to ceasefire. But as for now, they're still going on. So there's kind of hope. There's hope that this will come to like a positive outcome. At least I hope so. So according to the United Nations Development Program, there are benefits to achieving peace. And it's one of the things that the organizations in Colombia have been really focusing on, like encouraging people to understand how this peace process goes, understanding what are the positive things that could come out of this peace process. It's obviously a long process, but it can happen. And so one of the things, well, the things that they say is that peace is a safe way towards development. It can accelerate economic development. It actually shows that without conflict, GDP actually increases the double each year in the absence of conflict. There's also social inclusion, which is hard coming from a conflict that has many parties involved, but social inclusion is a vital issue. Better quality of life and better distribution of the land. So saying not only the victims got kicked out of their land and they took it for like illicit crops and things, but also, you know, it's, Colombia is a very unequal country, which is something that we don't exactly like to portray now, but it is still unequal. And so that's one of the main things that we need to achieve, not only with this peace process, but with like state reform, land reforms, and many other things. So, since conflict is kind of a dark topic to talk about, we have actually developed during those years. It's not like we stayed in that conflict and kind of like drowned in a glass of water because of this conflict. We still keep on going. And so I will be talking about some of the developments that we have done to make our country better and to, you know, just attract foreigners, you know, to invest and to realize that Colombia is actually a really good country. So starting with rural development, one of the main things that the government is trying to do now is land distribution. It's vital, as I mentioned. New technologies, actually. There are Colombian research teams right now that are developing new ways to maximize the production of agricultural goods, or, you know, have a better quality of these products. And that's through, you know, state aid, financial aid, education, many different programs. And it's really, really important because a great part of our economy is based on agriculture. So, and agricultural goods. Not only nationally, but also exports. One of our main exports was coffee, as well as flowers. So, and those are agricultural goods that we need to take care of, and with these developments, it's a way to try to do so. And then another thing is, well, urban development, which this is the part I'm most proud of. Medellin and Bogota are actually the most innovative cities in Colombia. They have set example in other cities in Latin America and the world. Actually, in 2013, Medellin was declared as the most innovative city in the world. So not only because of its architecture and infrastructure, but also because they created a lot of like eco-friendly buildings, intelligent buildings. They reduced their carbon dioxide emissions, and so, well, that's why they won the award. And obviously, well, Bogota, since it's the capital, it's what the state, well, the government offices are, and also where most of the foreign international negotiations are made. So it's also a pretty important place. And another thing that those two cities specifically have a lot of development is in transportation. So these are two, the picture in the left is from the bus system that we have in Bogota. It's called Transmilenio. And it's kind of a metro, but with buses. So a lot of people use it. We still have a lot of funny stories on this. Like, you can be so crowded, even more crowded than the shuttle bus here. Like, it's ridiculous. You're like sardines in there. So imagine if an architecture major guy comes with a thing, it's crushed if you use the public transportation. But it's still very effective, nonetheless. And then in the picture on the right is the metro of Medellin. It is one of the things that those people are most proud of. It's also very effective, and I think they also use kind of like eco-friendly energy sources to power that metro, so it's good. And then the other thing that is actually an example for other cities in the world, here in the US, in Los Angeles, it's a program that we call Ciclovia. And what it is that every Sunday, streets are closed for people to go bike, run, or skate, or walk, or whatever. So I will show you this little video of what it is about, if I can get the computer to work.
The obesity rates in the US have skyrocketed. Almost every state has obesity. And how else can you get thousands and thousands of people doing physical activity? So then the infrastructure is there. It's free. All you gotta do is close it. And then you can get this fantastic idea, which is like a polygon that everybody attends.
Esto lo que le ofrece a la gente es muchísima seguridad, muchísima tranquilidad, porque es un espacio muy amplio en el que pueden montar bicicleta, patines o caminar, totalmente seguros, totalmente confiados de que no les va a pasar nada.
This is beautiful, man, because everybody smiles to you.
Aparte de que es un trabajo en donde uno hace deporte, es un trabajo que puedes tener contacto directo con las personas y eso es muy gratificante. Cuando ves, digamos, le ofreces una actividad a un niño y él te regala una sonrisa, las gracias, eso es lo más gratificante para mí.
Sí, de la ciclovía, deporte, vida, aire puro, ejercicio, gimnasia, la gente, el calor humano, acá, en Colombia el calor humano, compartir con familia, en Colombia lo máximo.
¿Qué es lo que te inspira para venir a clase cada domingo?
Pues hacer deporte para mi salud.
Y las personas que no tienen bicicleta, pero que les gusta y saben montar, allí también la pueden encontrar completamente gratis para que den una vuelta dentro del parque, hagan actividad física, paseen con su familia y eso es totalmente gratis.
¿Y cuál es la mejor parte para ti de la ciclovía?
La mejor parte es todo, o sea, uno puede salir en bicicleta desde su casa, disfrutar de la ciclovía, puede coger cualquier trayecto de la ciclovía, puede llegar a un punto de actividad física, puede disfrutar de la clase y regresarse por ciclovía en su bicicleta de la casa.
It's really cool. I don't do those activities for the record. I just go bike with my brother, who is like super good at biking, and he leaves me behind like all the place. And yes.
Do they still have public transportation during that time?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the city is not. It doesn't stop. It's just, and they don't close every street. They close only the main ones. So obviously, it's a nightmare for those who are in cars, but. You know, it's something that we've been doing for quite a while now. So a lot of people are already used to it. They know what the times are, so they know, like, they're like, oh, ciclovia. So they don't get out until like after that or something. Or they actually go out and just make some workout or whatever. So yeah, it doesn't stop. The city doesn't stop, and it's not all the streets that we close. So, any other questions up to this point? Something? Cool. So moving on, another thing that we're like working towards is finding new renewable sources of energy. We are a very rich country. About 56% of the territory is covered natural forest, which again allows us to have a lot of water resources that are from there, a lot of species of plants. Animals, you name it. We have everything. It is, like I said, the first country in the world with the most species of birds, and the second in species of butterflies. I don't like butterflies though. So, but it is really cool that we have that. So because of that, the government actually created a new ministry, a Ministry of Environment, to deal with to protect all these good things. We create national parks, protecting the natives that live there, protecting from illicit crops, encouraging the manual eradication of illicit crops, which is less harmful than using gases to eradicate them. So that's kind of what the government is trying to, encourage people to do, especially farmers, because there are a lot of farmers that they don't know what to do. And so what they do is they train them to do this manual eradications of things. Obviously they come with a few consequences, but it's better for the environment to do it this way. And also we are trying to develop a diverse energy program, so it doesn't necessarily rely on renewable sources, but also like water, hydro plants, and wind thingy, and those things. So obviously that's also with the cooperation of corporations from other countries and education and a lot of our researchers in Colombia that try to work towards new sources of energy. In economic development, Colombia is the third largest GDP in South America. GDP means gross domestic product. We have had these past years have had the lowest inflation rates. It's one of the lowest inflation rates in Latin America. Given the fact that some countries in Latin America actually are in kind of a crisis right now, economic crisis right now. Argentina defaulted and all those things. So we're actually pretty lucky that our inflation rates are not high at all compared to other Latin American countries. Another thing is that we're never defaulted in our foreign debt. We're always able to pay our dues, unlike other countries that have defaulted. So that kind of brings also foreign investment because it shows responsibility. It shows that we're trying with our policies and everything. We're also recently classified as one of the countries in the CIVETs. The CIVETs are right after the BRICS. The BRICS is emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, and China, I think. And so we're now part of the CIVETs, which come right after that one, which is made of Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey, and South Africa. So because of this, our economy has been growing in the recent years. We've been signing different trade agreements, not only with the United States, but also with countries in Europe and several countries in Latin America. The pictures I have here right now is some of our national corporations that we have. Avianca is our airline, our national airline. It's actually international. I feel pretty proud about that one. Or at least my brother does. He wants to be a pilot, and so he's like, yeah, I want to go to Avianca so bad. And so, yeah, that's good. Éxito is a supermarket corporation. It's the biggest in Colombia. And it's actually a national corporation. We have other supermarkets, but we don't have Walmart, or we don't have most of them are actually from Latin America or Europe. And then the other one, which obviously expresses our biggest product, would say coffee. It's Juan Valdez Café. It's kind of our own Starbucks, and let me tell you, it's better than Starbucks. Better than so yeah, we have a few other stores all over the world, not all over the world, but mostly in Spain, France, and the US, and in Latin America, various in Latin America. So it's a pretty big company. So finally, one of the final things I wanted to touch on is cultural development. As I mentioned before, there are over 85 different ethnic groups in Colombia. It's very diverse, very, very much so. About 16% of the population is actually Afro-Colombian, and most of actually our roots and our traditions, musically speaking and culturally, come from this Afro-Colombian roots, as well as our native roots. you know, European roots, all of them is like mixed together. Here on the right I have a picture of our Nobel in literature, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He won the Nobel for his book, 100 Years of Solitude, I think it's called in English. And also, well, one of his legacies in literature in Colombia is his magical realism. I'm gonna tell you, it's hard to read him. Well, to me it was hard, I think. But it is a very enjoyable reading as well. And it is our national kind of icon, one of our national icons. And on the other side, well, there is more of a portrayal of our culture, and the other picture is some kids dancing in a carnival that I will be talking about in just a few moments. That happens in the coast of Colombia. But just as we have literature nobles, we are also really good literature pieces. We also have singers and actors that, you know, Sofia Vergara would be one example if you know her, or Shakira if you know her. So we have a lot of people actually. Should be someone. So talking about the parties and festivals, we are we're a feisty country. We like to party. And so all year long there is some kind of fair, some kind of festival going on. The picture in the left is from the Barranquilla Carnival. It's the second largest in Latin America. The first one is Rio's Carnival. It was declared by the UNESCO as human heritage. It happens in February, so we're right on it. And I think it's 3 to 4 days of just party. Dances and parades and all those things. On the picture, the up picture on the right, it's from the International Theater Festival in Bogota. That's also one of the biggest festivals that we have in the country. A lot of people from a lot of different countries come to do their theater pieces and musicals and all those things. I've actually never been into one of those things, but I do know for a fact that they also do parades in Bogota because the traffic jams are horrible. So, yeah, but it's really nice. It's a really, well, cultural. And the picture down there is from another fair happening in Manizales, which is also cultural. It happens in the center of the country, and again, there are parades and dances, typical dances and all those things. Yeah. So finally, oral tradition has always been a big thing when we grow up in Colombia. When they tell us stories and myths and legends from our natives, Indians, ancestors. So pictures I have right there, gold. They come from 2 different Indian groups in Colombia. They're located in the center of the country, but they have different kind of traditions. And so with that, as I told you before, we grew up with a lot of myths and legends. So for instance, the picture on the right, it's called Balsa Muisca. And the story behind that is a legend called El Dorado. So that legend is that there was this pond in like the middle of nowhere in the center of the country in which this Indian community used to bury its king's leaders. So what they did as a ritual was they put them in like a boat and they washed them with gold and jewelry and all those things, and they sank. And so when the Spaniards came, they obviously came looking for this El Dorado. They couldn't find anything. Up to this point, nobody has found anything. So we don't know if it's reality or if it's a myth or what it is, but a lot of people have tried to go deep into those waters looking for gold without success. And so, like that stories, there's also a story of how the sun was created, for instance, and how the water was created with a god that was standing on a rock, and then he just like said, so there's the sun or something. And just like that, we also have scary stories, you know, oral tradition, scary stories, legends, that they used to tell kids, they still do, they told me, keep me awake at night. But those are part of our oral tradition. So yeah, it's a lot of things. It's very diverse. So finally, I'd like to give you this image that says we're all created equally, but only lucky ones are created Colombian. Because being Colombian isn't just a nationality, it's a gift. And so, I think really Colombia is such a beautiful country, it's super diverse, it's really, really nice to live with. And even though we have gone through like a tremendous amount of violence and a lot of dark stuff has happened, we still kind of keep going forward, which is something really important, something I think that new generations have actually realized. Instead of criticizing a lot, we're trying to, do stuff new, innovate, create new plans, try to develop further and create new things. So I think that's very important. I really hope you liked this presentation. If you have any questions, just go ahead and ask. And yeah, thank you.